So I remember being a little kid and being taught that slaves were not allowed to read or write. Not quite, but it would be limited because Nat Turner could read. And these are some of the tags. Pretty horrific here. Had to have it. And if you were free, and there's any chance your skin might be too dark, you had to wear one to prove that you were free. So an internal passport. You see elements like that today. And limiting the right to assemble, which is why church would be so important. Strengthened the militia and censored the mail so abolitionist material could not be sent. So one thing about slavery, if you were not in the group that was enslaved, you might think you have rights. You don't. Everybody's freedom has to be curtailed because of the threat of slave rebellion. So regardless if you are free or enslaved, you do not have rights when there's slavery. Period. It's a police state for everybody. So 1831 was the year of Nat Turner's rebellion. No coincidence that the most important abolitionist newspaper, which we saw in the video, that's why I saw the quiz, The Liberator by William Lord Garrison, and unapologetically anti-slavery, slavery is a sin, and he was for equality. He was also at Seneca Falls, much like Frederick Douglass, who stole himself away, escaped slavery. He would start an anti-slavery newspaper called the North Star. When you're running away, you follow the North Star to get to camp or New England. And he believed in not just freedom, but equality. And he understood something innately. And that's part of the reason why he was also for women's rights. That racism is class-based. It goes back to the upper class trying to control the lower class. And it's all about status. And how it can be used against women too. Poor men might not have much. Dominance over them. That was the same kind of attitude. But abolitionists as a group was actually much more divided. They all believed slavery is immoral. But most abolitionists did not believe in equality. And most abolitionists in the North, and that was less than 10%, even by 1861, would have said we should have a multiracial, multi-ethnic republic. They talked openly that this should be a white republic, only a white people. So meaning people of full European descent. And that is why there were many abolitionists who believed that enslaved people, they're freed and they should be kicked out of the country. They should be sent back to Africa, like the American Colonization Society. They even carved out a part of Africa, very kind of, well, the whole thing was pretty scummy how they did it, but they carved out a part of Africa, made an independent country of, these are former slaves, emancipated slaves, either they freed themselves or were bought, are called freedmen. Here, a militia in the capital they named, and it's called Monrovia. They credited what James Monroe was president, and they go to Africa, freedom from chains. The idea we would not have race mixing. Does anybody know what country they would create? Yes, Liberia, for liberty. Liberia. And Liberia, it's going to have this caste system between those who came from America, born in America, as enslaved people, and those who live there. And Liberia is still. The Civil War's ended, but they're the very uneasy peace. They've had, in much of the 80s, 90s, into 2000s, a bloody, horrible civil war. Known for appalling atrocities, children being impressed to be soldiers. It's just hell. So this clearly did not work. Abraham Lincoln was very sympathetic to this idea. We'll come back to this. But this is a complex time, obviously, because we got the fiery 50s now. By the way, the fiery 50s, notice it's fiery. How do you do that? You notice that? Pretty cool, huh? Like, red light. That's John Brown. So these are the events that led up to war. So you have all these things starting up, and we got to backtrack a little bit right before the 50s started. Remember the Mexican Cession. That's right where we went before we went to slavery. And California wanted to become a free state because what was discovered in California? Gold. Yeah. So gold was discovered. And they want to come in as a free state. So Zachary Taylor's elected president, all rough and ready. And Taylor had no stated position. Remember the Wilmot Proviso and all that? He had no stated position. But he had befriended a few Northern Whigs who were anti-slavery. Why? William Sumner, who will come back to William Sumner. He'll be beaten nearly to death on the floor of the United States Senate 6 years later. We'll come to this. And Taylor looked at it like this. Going into the end of 1849, here's the problem as he sees it. The problem facing the nation, slavery and the territories. They all knew it, slavery and the territories. Because once the states had constitution, these are all states, if they had slave codes, they had slave codes. No slave codes, no slave codes. But the federal government decided slavery in the territories. Missouri Compromise, no slavery north of 3630, but didn't deal with this. So Taylor came up with an idea. If slavery in the territories is going to cause the war, let's just skip the territories. And let's make two giant states. Two giant states, New Mexico and California. A huge California and an incredibly big New Mexico. The borders were not clear. And that is him supposedly balancing out, like on a scale, balancing northern and southern interests. Yes, it's a very awkward looking picture, but that's his plan. And Taylor became absolutely convinced this is the only way to avoid civil war. And he became uncompromising in this. We will have this plan or nothing. This is our choice. Two free states, jumping down there, but two states, or civil war of the South Secedes, because they would come in with their existing constitutions or their existing laws, which were free because Mexico was anti-slave. So that's his position. And there were many Southerners were furious, not just for the policy, but at this betrayal. They thought he was a Southern plantation owner, which he was, like him or like them, and therefore would support the expansion of slavery. And they were furious. Now, many of the older members of Congress are starting to either retire or getting near the end. And a new group of Southerners, less compromising, more prone to immediately jump to secession, are coming into Congress known as the Fire Eaters. The Fire Eaters. They're younger and more prone to say secession at the drop of the hat. And that's immediately what they started talking. Edmund Ruffin was a congressman from Virginia, and he would later claim to be the one who fired the first cannon at Fort Sumter, starting the Civil War. Yancey was from Alabama. By the way, these pictures, they're all from the Civil War when they were in the Confederacy. Uncompromising talk of Civil War. We must have all of it open to slavery, including Oregon. And then James Mason of Virginia. So Virginia was Mason was a little bit more genteel, but just, he would not like say immediately secession, but that's the way he sympathized. DC was a very small town. Congress did not meet all around. Like in the summer, they couldn't meet. It was Washington, DC in the summer. So they stayed in boarding houses. It was a tiny little town, so they had to cram into boarding houses. And they all stayed at the same boarding house. There's about 15 fire leaders. And you can imagine all those guys together. And just reinforcing this. The North is out against. It's a plot. They're all trying to start a rebellion. We can't allow this. And they just assume they're all like each other. We're on the right path. Many Northerners were the same way. And they saw Taylor's plan and immediately said, we're seceding, and if Taylor wants war, we'll get it. Which, of course, everyone knew secession meant war. And so this little film clip from a Japanese game show shows it quite well. What's coming? Dangerous path. Okay, I'm not sure what the game is, but supposedly contestants have to dress up in suits and run through an explosion without getting knocked down or blown up. And I know what all of you are thinking. We have an assembly hall.
Yes,
Wouldn't that be awesome at the next assembly?
yes.
Now, we'd have to do it at Helen High so we could blow up their building.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that seems good,
That'll
right?
be part of demolition.
Yeah.
Oh, where was from?
Which one? Virginia. Edmund Ruffin. So. Into the breach one more time. And Henry Clay, you can tell from that 1849 picture, he knows he doesn't have many more opportunities left. And he would propose another compromise, like he did when he broke up the Missouri Compromise, like the Compromise Tariff back in 1833. It's going to be called the Compromise of 1850. Now, an all-encompassing bill in Congress is called an omnibus bill. So, you know, when they shut the government down, they just did a continuing resolution. They did not pass a budget. So on January 30th, we could go through this again, which is not long. But if they do come up with a budget bill, you heard it referred to as the omnibus, meaning all the stuff together. And what Henry Clay's omnibus bill was going to be is he's going to solve all the problems with the country. The great compromiser will solve everything. Actually, Zachary Taylor called this as an insult, the omnibus bill. But he will solve not just the Mexican section, but everything else. And so that will be his greatest achievement. He tried for president 4 times. That's not going to happen. He will save the Union one more time. So it's a 5-part bill. 5 parts. By the way, once again, resting face, has a smile. And you can't do this. No one can do this. You try to smile without your eyes smiling. You try to smile, your eyes will move. Everybody, try. See, your eyes start moving. Your eyes start moving. Can't be done. Now, once you start smiling, the eyes kind of curl up. Yeah, see? Can't help it. You just can't do it. Like he knew something. So, 5 parts. You're going to write 4 of them down. I'll tell you in a sec. So, California free. The Northerners wanted that. Do not write down number 2. It was slavery would be abolished in DC. Don't write this one down. Slavery would be abolished. And the thought was, how can we have slavery in the shadow of the capital, in the shadow of the nation's capital that was created with the idea of all men being created equal? But of course, Southerners were furious. Southerners didn't want either of these 2. And then Northerners didn't want the next part. New Mexico would be broken up into New Mexico and Utah territories with popular sovereignty, letting the people decide their own constitution, aka slave codes, no slave codes. Now, to do this, that means it's got to be open to slavery. They got to open it up to slavery. So we got Utah, New Mexico. So this one you have to write down. 2, massive territories. Next, the Constitution says that states must help return fugitives, slaves who had run away. Many northern states were openly not doing this. So a fugitive slave law to force states, but more importantly, for citizens of northern states to assist in returning slaves, returning enslaved people back into bondage, which of course Northerners were furious about this, the fugitive slave law. And then the last part, they would resolve the Texas border and they'd be absolved of its debt. So the Texas Republic had all this debt. The U.S. government would pay back the bondholders. Good deal, the bondholders. Now, we know where the Texas border is today, so this area would go into New Mexico. But Henry Clay actually shrunk Texas even more. I'll put my hand over the part where Clay said was Texas. Everything north of this would be New Mexico. Thus infuriating Northerners. Because in the law that created Texas, Texas could divide up into 5 states. Still the law today. Texas is divided in most states today. And the thought was in the South, we might need them for the Senate. Does anybody know the last time Texas talked about dividing up into 5 states? They talked seriously about at least dividing up into 2 or 3. In the early 1960s, to stop the movement for equal rights. They were to make sure that people would not be equal, so they started to make 2 more states. It didn't happen. Every once in a while, they bring it back up. Texas was opposed to equal rights. At least the party that had power. So these are the 4 of the parts. And this was Clay's strategy. We're all going to have to give up something. Southerners want a part, Northerners want a part. To be a true compromise, you have to give up something. And so that became Clay's idea. You have to give up something. Because he knew this might be his last effort. And there are uncompromising members of Congress coming in. This cartoon shows them as it's kind of opposed to the oh no, I jumped the gun. Here is the most famous picture of it. And it's like Clay he's carrying a bunch of basically like a massive bound book of the compromise. It's like this holy writ that they'll vote on to save the Union. But that was wishful thinking. It was a bitter fight from day one. This cartoon is supposed to show it, and there's Clay, others about ready to brawl. And soon after that happened, fire eaters said, no way, we won't vote for it. And Northern Free Soilers said, no way, we won't vote for it. And people started bringing guns and knives to the floor of the United States Congress. That cartoon shows it right there. In fact, a number of times during the debate of compromise, people started opening their coat and flash a knife or a gun to threaten other members of Congress. There were fistfights in the cloakroom, and it looked like civil war right there. And partially because of how controversial this bill was, so we're going to jump home. And Clay refused to break it up. And he had such power in the Senate, it wasn't going to be broken up. And so it wasn't going to pass. In fact, when Clay would go home that summer, it didn't pass. And he thought it was over. He went home assuming not only was he a failure for not getting the bill passed, he was a failure because the country's dead. The Union is over in the United States. He sincerely believed it. And he was already feeling pretty bad. He knew the end might be close. And he would be right. That is Henry Clay's death. So, before the time of photography, if you want to remember a loved one who died, as soon as they passed away, it'd be very common, especially have a little bit of money, to do a death mask. Quick plaster mask, so you can see and remember what they're facing. Hair is obviously tough to do, so they didn't really do the hair. Make the mask and use that to form a mold. Even in death, he had the same resting smile. Henry Clay would pass away. Daniel Webster, the prominent Whig from Massachusetts, got up to support the bill, to try to convince Northerners to support it. And he gave this famous speech, not as a Massachusetts man, not as a Northern man, but as an American. He gave that speech, trying to convince Northern Free Soilers to vote for it. He failed. It did not pass. And first off, doesn't he look like an angry owl? Doesn't he get angry owl vibes from that? I see angry owl. He too would pass away. Both within a year of this debate, Daniel Webster. So the old members of Congress, those who had compromised in all those years, Missouri Compromise on, they're getting out of Congress. And so the debate went on. There's another picture trying to show it as a holy writ. A holy writ. Now, one more thing, just so. Now I heard something. One man got up. He was, in fact, he couldn't get it. He was so ill, he had to be carried in on a stretcher. He was so ill that tied to the stretcher, they just kind of leaned it back, and James Mason read his speech. He was so ill. And when all that was. John C. Calhoun. By the way, look at the finger. That's like 6 joints. I get what he's in necker, but the hair is pretty cool. He was so ill. He read his Mason read his speech in opposition and said, not only must the compromise of 1850 fail, we need a new constitution with 2 presidents and 2 vetoes for each president, so they can stop any bill that might affect their section, a northern president and a southern president. Therefore, slavery can be protected even if the North gets more population and more states. By the way, if you have a system where you have 2 vetoes, what's ever going to be passed Congress? Nothing much like today. And look, no matter where you're at in this room, it doesn't matter where you're at, he's looking at you, right? Look, he's not really looking at you. Right now. He too knew the end was near. But I thought I'd show this a little bit. Most AI stuff is slop, but that's a little creepy. You got to give it that, right? I have an ID for that. Speaking of that, that's his grave in Charleston. Calhoun too would pass away. 1850. Tuberculosis. And so, just imagine a dark night, no moon, maybe a storm, lightning, thunderstorm, the power goes. You're in the middle of the night. You wake up with a start. You hear something. You open your eyes. You look up, and you see this face floating over you. That's a Halloween costume, right? Yes, that is his death mask. John C. Calhoun is dead.
No.
Yes. I know. It was all depending on the artist. Yeah. Same thing. Some people, they try to carve in hair. Some they just don't. Because he had hair. So, this is a picture of Zachary Taylor taken May of 1850. And it looked like it's over. Taylor would go to the 4th of July celebration. Congress was in recess with the assumption this is the end. And he never refused to compromise. 2 states or nothing. And he said, much like Andrew Jackson, if Southern states secede, I will personally lead the troops. In fact, for that 4th of July celebration, look how happy they are. He wore his Major General's uniform. He's the president. He wore as a sign to Southerners who were there, I will lead the army myself. So he's channeling Andrew Jackson. But unlike Jackson, remember, Jackson found a way to compromise. Taylor could not see a way to compromise. He was furious. And he was already feeling bad. He didn't feel good. But he went that day. Now, does anybody know what the weather's like in Washington, D.C. in July? The average temperature is 1,000,000 degrees above Fahrenheit. Easily.
Up there.
Yeah, above. And I haven't got to the wind chill, right? He wore his wool uniform. Now, we all know a wool uniform is perfect in warm weather, right? Because it keeps the heat out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Keeps the heat out. The next really hot day, just wear wool. Just bundle up.
Yeah.
You'll feel so much better. When he got back, he didn't feel good. And they decided, well, he was burning up, fever. They decided to give him his favorite dessert. They called it chilled cream and berries. Now, here is an actual picture of his dessert right before he, that's the actual picture.
Very colorful.
What do we call chilled cream? What is that? It's ice cream. Ice cream. Just ice cream and berries. Hey, how did you do ice cream in 1850 in Washington, D.C. anyway? Where do you get ice from?
Yes.
How do you make ice in 1850? You don't, you wait till winter. You cut the ice on the lakes. Underground ice houses, yeah. So you have ice in the summer. By the way, refrigeration is literally just being invented in Louisiana. Literally at this moment. There was a big steam engine. It's not very practical yet, but it's just starting. So back to this. Okay, didn't help. He felt miserable that night. Woke up in agony with a hot, really high fever. By the end of that on the 5th, he was delirious. Next day, he's in and out of consciousness. Well, I think you know what's coming, people. The death of Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor would be the second president to die. Yeah.
Before yesterday. Yeah.
What's the date today?
This is.
Today's the 25th. Yeah, so he was, yep. He was born yesterday. Look good. And one more thing. See his death mask? I don't know. Nothing. Don't know. Got John Brown. Got John Brown. Very good. Just imagine this situation. We're on the edge of civil war. There's a compromise attempt and it's failed. All the members of Congress have gone home, assuming it's over. And then the president dies. Can you imagine a more terrifying time? Who's going to take the country? Who will step into the breach, people? We all know who's going to be there, don't we? Raul C. Calhoun, his brother. Raul came riding in Washington, D.C. on a mighty steed and took the reins of government. He's made up. Okay. No, that's not his brother. A former student of mine made Raul C. Calhoun, and it's really pretty darn good, isn't it? It's got the neck hair, the long finger, just put glasses on. Actually, it was no single person. Millard Fillmore was more open to compromise. He was a Northern Whig open to compromise. And then, with Clay ill and not coming back right away, when the Senate reconvened, a new senator came in. Well, he could take power. His name was Stephen Douglas, the Little Giant. He was senator from Illinois, a Democrat, incredibly talented politician. Stephen Douglas, the Little Giant, he's about 5'5". That's why they call him the Giant. And he did what Clay refused to do. He broke up the bill into 3 parts. Therefore, they could pass individually. And with Fillmore's support and Clay not arriving till late, and Clay was so ill when he got there anyways, it could pass. And this Douglas believed would propel him to the presidency. It almost did. Almost. So let's go back. Remember, we wrote down 4 things for the compromise. So add a number 2. The slave trade was abolished in DC. So no more open air markets of slaves. And these 2 passed with Northern support. So the North voted for this. Every member of the House and the Senate for the South voted against it, but it wasn't enough. It passed. Now the South needs a few Northern votes, but they would get it. The next one we already have. So I already wrote this down. Southern support. That got a few Northern votes. So that everyone got that one. North for the first 2, South. Then the last 2 they combined into one bill, and they passed with Southern support. The compromise passed, much like the Missouri Compromise was broken up into 2. This was broken up into 3. So slaveholders could still be slavers, could still bring their slaves into DC, but no more open markets for slavery. The idea was we'll hide it, which infuriated the South anyways. So the compromise was signed. And so we need to show the glee, the happiness that people had by showing you a very happy dog. Okay, that's kind of awesome. I'm not going to lie. I would like to do that. Who else would do that? Hey. So this woman who did this, the dog, every pile of leaves the dog would jump into. So there's like 100 people. Was it successful? Was the compromise successful? Didn't save the union. No more union. Is the union still here? Yes, it's still here. It pushed Civil War back by a little bit. So I know what you're saying, it didn't stop Civil War. But those 10 years would be decisive. If Civil War would happen in 1850, the South would have won and the United States would have done. There's no way the United States would have won. And so what would happen is it would have broken up into different states. Would have been done. But I showed you this map before, a map similar. The red railroads in 1850, 1860. See the difference? Not only that, think about the industry involved to build this railroad. That would be decisive for the victory of the Civil War, decisive for the victory of the United States. So I know what it's saying, and I would think that too, but they think, well, we're still here. Oh, it did not prevent a war that's going to kill 800,000 people, devastate the country, and the South almost won. So we will pick it up right here on Monday, the election of 1850. And now you guys are going to be away from me for 5 days. I don't know how you're going to do it. I feel your pains.
We're gonna be so excited. That show is gonna be great.
By the way, we didn't have a Flamingo Friday this week.
But today's.
Love to come back here on Friday.
No,
Now, we could have a two-can Tuesday.
oh, it won't be too bad, but it won't be the same.
Won't be the same. All right. Have a good break, everybody. Anybody leaving the city? You, where you going? Huh? Going to White House? And where are you going? Oh, going to Washington State. Just do Washington. Well, those are all pretty cool. Not the same as Miles City. I don't know if you guys could have made it in Miles City. I don't think so. Mean streets.
And now it's just. Even like. Early, this. Well, like.